just gonna have to move somewhere
No,
else.
yeah, no. So yeah, welcome to Bob the Father. No, tonight there's the training league for the soccer. So I didn't realize soccer started this early, but I guess that's true. So yeah, parking is a factor, but that's good. So we're here in our dining room at St. Anne. So yeah, it's open. Any questions anyone has or anything wants to discuss, feel free.
What is your vision for us as a parish?
Yeah, good. Something as far as the vision for the parish is concerned, that's something I've been kind of discerning over the course of the last few months. And again, I haven't been here a full year, so part of that could change over the next few months as I observe like how the school year begins and how that kind of all works. Primarily, my main focus is really going to be to grow, right? So growth as far as not just in number, but primarily spiritually, right? So this last year, in a lot of the aspects, I've been kind of saying over and over again, I'm just observing, and I'm still kind of doing that to determine the best course of action. And so I preface by saying that vision may change the next month, the next weeks, in a few months, whatever. But primarily what I see is a lot of opportunity for evangelization, a lot of opportunity for growth in the spiritual life, and growth in the actual growth of the number of community. So to maybe already kind of engage in that, one thing I've been doing the last few days is I've been calling, and this actually is part of my article this weekend, looking forward for RCIA. So just so everyone understands, I don't present RCIA, or I should say OCIA, the Order of Christian Initiation for Adults, as OCIA. I present it as adult faith formation. Because my thought is that not only is it a process for those who may want to enter the church to come into the church, it's also a benefit for Catholics to learn more about the faith. So it's open to anybody. It's not just open to anyone who's trying to become Catholic or Christian. So what I've been doing, though, is I've been calling the non-Catholic parties in the parish to invite them. So I'm happy to say right now we have about 14 names that we're starting on August 18th with the process of the meet and greet to go into the adult faith formation for the rest of the year. Now, I'm not saying all 14 of those names are going to become Catholic in April. If we get 2 of those people, or 3, or 4, or 10, fine. That's God's will. I leave it up to Him to make those determinations. All we can do is present the truth in the way the church teaches and pray for them, right? So that's kind of the vision. So primarily that's my focus, is to grow spiritually, to grow in number, and seeking out ways to do that. Now that also comes with more practicalities, right? So one thing that we've been talking about is kind of maybe going forward with the school community in integration of the parish community, right? So what that means is we're going to probably see some more alignment with the way the Mass is celebrated on Sunday and the rest of the week with the way the Mass is celebrated with the school kids, right?
Can you elaborate what you mean?
Yeah, so for instance, one thing we've been discussing with our school leadership is what would be appropriate and proper and helpful in fostering a deep appreciation for the Mass, not only for the kids, but also for the adults to come to the daily Mass. So one of the ways we're engaging that way is, first off, to be a minister at the Mass, one needs to be baptized. Now, that's not a Father Mark rule, that's not a St. Anne rule, that's a rule of the church. So because these ministries that we engage with in the Mass flow from the common priesthood, and the common priesthood is given to us when we're baptized, because we're anointed in our baptism as priest, prophet, and king. From my understanding, there's been some children who aren't baptized that are ministering. That's a problem, right? The other thing we're looking at is also only having kids of a certain age minister. Not only is that going to be help with maybe the readings and kind of fostering, but also probably deepen appreciation for the older kids to actually engage those ministries too, even after they graduate. One thing I think that we see here that I've seen in other parishes that I've been at was, for some reason, our servers stopped serving after they graduate 8th grade. I don't know when that began, but it's not just St. Anne. Every parish engages that in some way. So we're going to try and maybe get rid of not get rid of that, but expand that. So I know when I was serving, I had to tell the pastor the reason why I can't serve anymore. Now that reason was I have a job, and I can't necessarily be at the mass you schedule me for. And so to not limit you, I'm going to come to mass obviously because that's our obligation, but I may not be able to serve because maybe I might have to also leave mass early to go to work or whatever. So that was understandable. And that's kind of what I'm looking for as far as our current servers. So I don't see why we can't keep the server on the roster, even the high school. And then if they have a reason, they can talk to me and say, even if it's just like, I don't want to serve anymore. Okay, thank you for your service. Praise God. Some other factors we're looking at too is it was brought up like why, if our kids are being confirmed, why aren't they servers? So it's going to also be a requirement of confirmation that even before or after confirmed, you are going to be a server. We even talked about possibly having the confirmed middle schoolers act as other ministers, maybe extraordinary ministers. Now, there may be an age limitation on that, so we have to look at that. But it also is not out of the realm of possibility, right?
They'd be wonderful greeters. Or lectors.
Well, lectors, they do that already in the classes, right? Mm-hmm. So if we're limiting like from 3rd grade up to be ministers in the mass, mm-hmm. So they'll include those middle schoolers too. So yeah, that's kind of part of it is kind of engaging, and this is always a struggle with any parish as a school is how to engage the school families with the parish life. And that's another thing I'm trying to focus on. Engaging RCA and adult faith formation will be helpful for that. But even our Catholic parties, So there's always, everywhere I've been, there's always been a disconnect between the school and the parish. And what makes it another factor here is that a lot of our school families aren't Catholic. So we're trying to engage in that way, right? So as I always tell these families who we're talking to from RCA, it's like, there's an obligation to become Catholic. It's really just a way for you to grow. And if you feel called during that process, great, right? But even if you don't, you're still welcome to come and learn. And maybe not this year, maybe next year, maybe 5 years, whatever it is, this can be beneficial regardless. And anything, it helps you to learn what your children are learning in the school and maybe have a deeper discussion about those things. So that's how we're kind of marketing the parish and kind of going forward. As far as the spiritual aspects are concerned, I think we can definitely look at one thing I want to do, and this might happen after we get the video system in place, is open the churches more for individual prayer time. Right. Right now, we kind of close the doors of the church just because, well, there's factors of nobody's in there, so and security. The doors, security. Another thing that was brought up, which may be something we can look at, is putting in a time lock door, which would be a very, I think, simple and cheap way of keeping the church open and allowing access for people to come and pray. So that's another thing we're kind of looking at is more individual prayer time and keeping the church open for those opportunities.
So how do you measure spiritual growth?
Well, so, part of that is participation, right? So I think one thing has been good is having the novena. I think that's been a good start. I think from that it can build on that. So one thing was brought up one of our last meetings was how come we don't see more of like liturgy of the hours? Yeah, why don't we? Right? So that could be a possibility too, right? Maybe more time for adoration, exposition and benediction. I'm not opposed to that at all, right? Engaging our school kids and the teachers to be more engaged with those opportunities, especially on Friday, the first Fridays, where they have half days, because half days are trying to look for stuff to do anyway, and there's not enough time to do a lot of stuff, and there's too little time to do anything, So why not bring over to church for a half an hour? That's one thing I'm really going to promote for our teachers, as well as just being. One other thing I'm planning to do there too is last year I kind of told the teachers, because I kind of came in late, was I'm happy to come if you want me to come, but I want to be invited and I'll have a schedule and you can sign up for those times. This year it's going to be more, I'm coming into your classroom at least once a month. So you can choose when that's going to be, or I can pick it for you. So that's kind of how we're going to work, as well as engaging with the sacramental aspect of our first reconciliation and Eucharist recipients.
What does a visit to a classroom? What does that consist of?
Well,
How fun
primarily
is
what
that,
I'm thinking
right?
is teaching, right? So in other words,
Teaching,
yeah. So I mean
yeah.
that's the thing. It's
Yeah.
like if you want me to engage in some way, you can tell me what you're going to teach in the classroom or what you're talking about, and I can engage that. Or I can bring my own topic. I don't care, but I'm coming into your classroom and teaching the students
Awesome.
at some point
Awesome.
over the awesome, right?
Awesome.
I said, what teacher?
So, well, I don't know. From what I saw this past year, some don't. So, okay, I don't want to. I'd rather you want me to come there than force myself upon you. But
Right.
if you're not going to want me there, then I'm going to force myself upon you. Sorry, right?
Good for you.
This is my.
Your job,
I'm the
right?
spiritual
I
shepherd of
still
these people.
remember
It's your job
some
as
of the
shepherd
lessons.
Right.
to do that.
Right.
The priest, when the priest would come into the classroom, I still remember.
Oh, Connie,
They
this,
were
when
special.
I was growing up, the associate
I
pastor would
loved
come
it.
in to our classroom once a month,
Yeah,
every grade.
it was
And
great.
so and so it was, and that was probably the most memorable time. Because not only do you remember like, oh,
Never.
Father actually came in, and it was actually kind of fun, and we had a good time,
Makes
you
you
know,
more human.
right? And also kind of those. I think that's where I learned the most from religion. And again, we have good lay teachers, and God bless them. I think they were faithful people, but also like they just. There's a reason why I was in college where I actually realized the real presence of Jesus was actually present in the Eucharist. Because I was actually confronted with that and forced to defend it or like understand it. So I had to go research it. And I'm sure that was said at one point in my formation at Immaculate Heart of Mary, but as a second grader, how much do you really retain?
Yeah.
Right?
When the priest came in, did you class have to say in unison, "Good morning, Father"?
Stand
Yes.
Up on
Yeah.
it.
We had to
Right.
do that.
Oh, absolutely.
And they should.
I'm not forcing
Yeah.
that on anybody.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's a third year.
Well,
But you know
yeah,
what?
yeah,
It
yeah.
teaches
It
respect.
teaches
Right.
respect.
And that's one of the things about a private school.
Well, that's true, and I think
I think the teachers.
one of the big differences is Immaculate Heart of Mary. All of us were Catholic. I'm walking into classrooms here where it's really only maybe 10% or 20% are actually Catholic.
But non-Catholic kids need to learn respect too.
Fair,
Mm-hmm.
but also like, we'll take baby steps. Let's look at that, right?
Well, when I teach at Pat, like today, maybe 30% are Catholic.
Yeah.
They all pray.
Yeah,
Or they keep their mouth shut.
right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, as far as vision, that's some ideas moving forward of how to kind of
Mhm.
grow and interact, and so that's kind of the plan right now.
So with the OCIA, RCIA, whatever
Yeah,
you want to
OCIA,
call it,
yeah,
okay.
right.
Are you inviting other people too?
Yeah.
You said,
Yeah, as a matter of fact,
Okay.
in my bulletin article, that's what I'm basically saying is it's not just for non-Catholics, this is for anybody. So, and I even say if you know someone who's even not Catholic or wants to know more about faith, send them our way. So,
Calendar event.
I talked to actually Don Wright, who's our kind of our coordinator. He's on board again this year, so praise God. So we're gonna have a meet and greet on August 18th after the 8 o'clock mass down in the assembly room or the parish center, depending on how big it gets. And then we're going to start our first session on the 25th of August, which is the Feast of St. Louis, which is interesting too. It's also Archbishop Rosansky's anniversary, becoming the Archbishop of St. Louis, so that's kind of neat. So maybe fitting time to start. That's the plan going forward for our stay.
So the meet and greet is for parishioners to greet people or just the
It's-
people that you call?
Anybody. It's open to anybody. So it's really more kind of get an overview of what the process is going to be going forward for these sessions, right? But it's really also to learn and kind of meet the catechist and team. And
so what time is that?
They'll be after the 8 o'clock mass, so 9-ish, 8:45-ish, depending on how quick I want to preach or how much I want to preach, I guess. Or the deacon preaches. I'm not sure as that weekend. We'll figure that out. So I'll meet with the deacon actually tomorrow, I think. Yeah, we're actually talking. This weekend starts the John 6 gospel for the next 5 weeks. So it's always good to have a common front on those readings and gospel and preaching. So I think we're going to discuss that for sure.
So do you go by anything? Do you let Don run everything, or do you
Yeah,
have
you know,
an agenda?
Yeah, so Don does have we have a program,
Okay.
and it's based it was from what I saw last year very good. It's kind of more discussional, which I think is the proper way to do it. And I'm there more just to confuse and answer more questions. Yeah, my role is more there as a backup, so I kind of let the team kind of take the lead. And if there's like a question, or if I hear something that might be somewhat they want to clarify that, I tend to step in. So that's kind of my approach. I think going forward, I think we'll talk with Don about, he's always willing to have more help. So if anyone also wants to teach it, we might have some training sessions coming up in the next few weeks to discuss that. But also I think going forward, we may actually kind of expand. I mean, Don's kind of the one who usually runs it, but I think open up the other catechists to run it will give him some breathing room, but also kind of engage more people too, right? So we want this to be an event for the parish. So that's kind of, I think, the plan for OCIA. And that's kind of close to my heart. I actually like, I mean, I love teaching in the classrooms, but OCI is kind of nice because, like, it's one thing to kind of like, I think the hardest class I teach when it comes to religion is sort of the kindergarten classes, the early, the early classes. You have to kind of like portray it in a way that is boiled down, right, in some way at the root. Whereas adults, you can get more in the nuance. I mean, there's ways to do that with children too, but sometimes when you talk about the mystery of the incarnation, well, how much can you really get into that? I mean, I think it's always beautiful and also funny when you get the question about, like, well, wait a minute. When you talk about, well, did Jesus have a body? Yes. Did he have a body before he was born? What? And so they're getting that kind of conversation, and it's like, well, all right, so Jesus is God, right? Yeah. So when was he God? Well, always. So how does he have a body, and how does that work, right? Or when you get the question inevitably, like, who created God? And it's like, well, nobody did, because if someone created God, they would then be God.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, so getting into those kind of discussions, especially with those age groups, could be fun and sometimes frustrating. So, but when you have an adult, you can kind of like, well, here's kind of what we mean by that, right? How we understand it. Then you can talk about some of the more, open questions, like, some of the less definitive answer questions, like, okay, well, did Mary die? Well, that's an open question. You can hold either way. From the church doesn't teach anything definitively on that. Was John the Baptist born without original sin? It's an open question. You can actually choose either one for that, right? So I think what's interesting about theology is a lot of questions that the church doesn't definitively teach, which leaves it open to interpretation and reason, where there are certain things that are definitively taught. And in reality, there are not a lot of things the church definitively teaches, except for what Jesus teaches and what has been understood from that. Today I was at the Respect Life Apostolate, because that's my third job. And we were talking about, we've been going through the audiences of John Paul II and theology of the body. We've been kind of discussing those. And, we were talking about kind of different things that you have to give assent. And we ultimately came out to talk about sainthood, that, the church teaches their communion of saints. And the church teaches there are certain people in heaven. But even though if the church declares someone canonized, you don't have to personally have a devotion or obligated to actually assent to that. So, like, for instance, there are certain people that when it came to, like, Paul VI, like St. Paul VI, right? Well, Humanae Vitae was a wonderful document, and it was clear and concise and prophetic, you would even say. But some may argue that Paul VI didn't go far enough to promulgate it and promote it and give the authoritative papal stamp that would root out a lot of the questions that came about when it was actually promulgated, right? Because there were even seminary presidents and university presidents that denounced it and said this is not authoritative. Okay.
Is it true?
Is it right?
Is it true?
And so, but you could say, was that an act of humility on the part of Paul VI? Well, maybe, but is it heroically virtuous? Right? Because that's the definition of a saint. We're all called to do things that are moral, meaning, what God calls us to do. So, like, for instance, is it a moral imperative that if a gunman, let's say, comes into the church and, opens up fire, do I have to jump in front of a bullet for somebody else? Morally, no, right? You're not called to do that. Now, if you did, that'd be heroically virtuous, that'd be courageous and heroically charitable, and you would die a martyr. You would obviously you would understand in heaven, right? But morally speaking, you're not called to do that. You don't have to do that. Let's put it that way. Calling and having to do something are two different things. So in that respect, we can look at those things and say, well, if the definition of a saint is of someone who's heroically virtuous, right? Go above and beyond, not just do the moral, but do beyond the moral, right? So for Paul VI, it's an open question. Even though the church has canonized him and says, yep, we understand that he is on our canon and as a day on the calendar, you don't have to have a devotion to him, though. That's up to you, right? Same thing kind of with Marian apparitions. The church has never says that one must believe that Our Lady of Guadalupe actually appeared to Juan Diego, or that Our Lady of Knock actually appeared in that town, or Fatima. What the church says is there's nothing to say you can't have a devotion to it. That's all the church really goes far as saying. Same with Eucharistic miracles, right? So we just had one in Connecticut recently where there was a claim that the Eucharist miraculously multiplied. And we had another instance of a bleeding host down in Australia that I'm sure is going to be tested and whatever else. This just happened last year, right? Okay, all the church will say about those things that, well, you can have devotion to it. We've done some tests and found out that there's some legitimacy, but it's up to you.
We're not saying it's not.
Right. So in other words, you're not obliged to believe it actually is a thing, but there's nothing theologically or morally that would keep you from having a devotion to this. That's all the church will say.
Why?
Because I think the church wants to be open to possibilities. Right? So let's say there's this host that bleeds. Let's say there's some tests done today and say, you know what, yeah, it's weird. They tested this host and it came back that it was actually a piece of cardiac tissue that was living and had AV blood, right?
Right.
Okay, cool. But let's say like 100 years from now, there's some evidence that comes out, it's like, oh, that was all, there was a way they could manipulate the molecules that it was technology that was really cutting edge at the time, but now we have some ways of doing that. Okay, well, there's a reasonable explanation for that then. So, but the church would never go back and say, nope, don't believe it. It's just, well, even at the time, that'd be very miraculous for something like that to happen. So you can still have a devotion to it, right? Which is why Eucharistic miracles in themselves shouldn't be our only tenet of faith. They point to the faith being true, but they shouldn't be our sole basis of saying it is 100% true, right? Because there can be an explanation the church just doesn't know about. And if that explanation comes about, you can say, okay, well, that's why we don't say you don't definitively, say it. And also why the church is always, there's never been anything to contradict the teaching of the church in many of these things, right? So now, the only caveat there, let's say, if Jesus ever said, hey, you know what, I'm going to have these miracles happen based on the Eucharist one day, and you should actually hold that as a tenet of faith. That's a whole different story.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Yes. Beautiful. But Jesus never said that. Nor did the apostles ever teach that. Because, in reality, because every Eucharist is a miracle. The fact that the body and blood of Jesus comes about through bread and wine, through the words of Jesus, all throughout history for all eternity. Yeah, that's miraculous. I don't need a scientific study to tell me that, because Jesus said that, and he's God, and if he's God, he can't lie.
If you have faith,
Right.
then it's there.
Yeah, that's the
you
whole
don't
basis.
need to prove.
If I believe Jesus is God, then if he says this is my body, this piece of bread is my body, then that happens. If he can by a word create everything I see, he can also say this piece of bread now is my body. That's my logical reasoning. I don't need anything else. and my faith leads that logic. So perfect.
So logical.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns, heresies?
Well, I have a question.
Yeah, great. Copy.
I have a friend who was born and baptized at St. Gregory, grew up in the church,
Mhm.
and now she swears that she's not happy with the Catholic Church, so she has chosen to go to her own kind of Catholic church in
Okay.
Webster Groves.
Oh,
And so my question is, they hire their priests.
so is schismatic church.
So is the Eucharist, I mean, depending upon who the priest is, I mean, one week it's a woman, one week it's a hired man.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. Is it,
Yeah, good.
what is it?
Yeah, good. Okay, so the question, just so everyone can hear, was what happens if somebody who's been baptized in the Roman Catholic Church, raised in the church, maybe received their full initiation in front
Yeah,
of them,
oh yeah.
then tends to, because of whatever, I mean, not happy with the church, in that case, get in line, in some ways. But for whatever reason, goes to the old Catholic Church, or the what's called as the Polish National Catholic Church, or some of these other churches that are what we call schismatic, broken away from the Roman Catholic or even the Eastern Rite churches, right? Not including the Orthodox churches. So the question is it still the Eucharist? Is it valid? And the response I think one could give with that is it depends. It depends on really two things. First off, is the person that actually is providing the rite validly ordained? Now you mentioned sometimes it's a woman. Well, then if it's a woman, they are not validly ordained. And the reason they're not validly ordained is really fourfold, right? Because this kind of stems from the idea of the all-male priesthood, right? Why does the church hold up, and the Orthodox hold up the all-male priesthood? Well, there's kind of four answers to that. The first is historical. So when you look at our roots in Judaism, the priests were always male. Whenever the sacrifices or the offerings in the Holy of Holies were given, it was always a male priest that did it. You had a Levite tribe, which was male and female, that was the priestly tribe, which also included women who did some ministry, maybe music, maybe they would maintain certain things, right? Whatever. But the offering was always done by a priest, a Levite priest that was a male. Now we could ask, well, why? Well, part of that could be cultural, because the societies and civilizations that had priestesses, even those priestesses were directed for a particular purpose in their exercise of their office, if you want to call it that. In other words, you would never see a priestess offering the sacrifice of a bull or a sacrifice of grain or incense. The main job of a priestess was fertility rite. And we would know that colloquially as temple prostitution. So that was incompatible with God's plan, his law, which is why the Jewish people didn't have priestesses, right? So we can say, well, yeah, but okay, great, that's fine for back then. What about now? Well, okay, in that respect, we would have to look to Jesus, who is the high priest. And so with Jesus, there's kind of three other reasons. Firstly, if you look at when the Eucharist actually instituted, and when the priesthood was instituted, that happened at the Last Supper. Who was present at the Last Supper? Jesus and his 12. Mary, the Blessed Mother, was not there. Mary Magdalene wasn't there. Mary, wife of Clopas, wasn't there. None of these female disciples are there. And you could ask, well, how do we know that? I mean, Jesus wasn't really one about societal norms, so wouldn't he bring the women into these areas? Well, I think the only answer we can give is tradition. Because if we look at what the Last Supper is, it's a celebration of the Passover. And faithful Jews in the Passover, when they celebrate the Passover, just like they would with the rites in the temple, they would separate the sexes. So in other words, women went with women, men went with men, and they would celebrate the Passover in those groups. Which is also why Jesus was left behind when he was 12. Because Mary and Joseph went to separate ages, and Jesus being 12, well, he could have been with the men, could have been with the women. So if he wasn't with Joseph, Joseph probably assumed it was Mary. He wasn't with Mary, Mary probably assumed it was Joseph. And that's why they left and didn't realize for 3 days that he wasn't there, or a day he wasn't there, right? It seemed that Jesus maintained that tradition, which is ceremonial, right? And so because when he instituted the Eucharist and the priesthood, the women weren't there, he did that with his 12 apostles, which would have been intentional. Now we could ask, why would that be intentional? Well, if we understand the Eucharist to be the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, well, that body, that soul, that blood was male. He was incarnate into a male body. Now, if he were incarnate into a female body, we may have a different discussion altogether. But he wasn't. And so it seems that the reason he had all men there was that the men in his person would be able to give their bodies, Jesus' male body, to those people in a profound, intimate way. So when the priest is actually celebrating the Mass, he's truly given his body in the person of Jesus. You're not saying to me you're taking a piece of my arm, you're actually taking Jesus' body through the priest in a male way of giving. The other reason we can actually look at this and say that the male priesthood is because of the spousal nature between Jesus and his church. That every Mass that we celebrate, we're going to a wedding feast. And we're witnessing the consummation of that marriage between the bride and the bridegroom. Well, this also goes to the theology of what marriage is. Marriage is a giving of self between man and woman. And so Jesus, as the bridegroom, is taking his bride, the church, at the Mass. And that can only happen between a male body and a female body, which is why you need a male body representing the priesthood and the female body represented by the church. Right? So if you think about it, it all makes sense. And that also aligns with our understanding of what marriage is too, right? So it all is connected. So to that answer, if it's a woman, right away you can say that's not a valid priesthood. If it's a male, it depends. If he was validly ordained, meaning a bishop, a validly ordained bishop, consecrated him, that can trace his lineage back to one of the apostles, it could very well be. So a great example of that, right, at least I think, well, I don't know, St. Stanislaus, right? So when that all went down, they brought now that priest was excommunicated,
Right.
okay, but excommunication does not remove the validity of your priesthood. So even though he'd be celebrating illicitly the sacrament of the Eucharist and penance and other things, if he says, this is my body and this is my blood, that is a valid Eucharist.
Will he get in trouble with that?
What do you mean?
Well, I guess in a mortal sin.
You will have to answer.
That I would imagine he would have to answer that. That's between him and God.
Well, I
Yeah.
you know.
I would imagine that there'd be some consequence for that. Hopefully not damnation, but definitely maybe some time in purgatory.
I don't know. So
You know.
you have explained it brilliantly.
Oh, thank you.
So if you explained it, why does the Episcopalian Church then?
Good. So, okay, so when we talk about validly ordained bishops and consecration, right? So, like for instance, I had a cousin who got married in the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church, right? Now, the Missouri Synod has an understanding of real presence of the Eucharist, right? Which is why they also have tabernacles in their churches, which is very interesting. And that's good. We can say, hey, that's awesome, right? We have this understanding that's common, that's great. We would say the difference would be, though, well, you guys have lost your apostolic succession. Because once you broke away from the church, even though maybe at the time of Luther he had validly ordained priests and bishops, maybe he did, by breaking away from that unity, you've also broken that chain of succession. So in other words, if a bishop were to consecrate another bishop or another priest and they were outside of that connection. Anyone when they actually consecrate or ordain would not be validly ordained. So for these other churches that broke that chain, maybe those directly ordained by the validly ordained bishops are still ordained, but they can't ordain anybody else, right? So for Episcopalians, they could say, yeah, we have apostolic succession, and we say, yeah, you did at one point, but today you broke that chain, right? So you don't have a valid priesthood.
And that applies to the Church of England.
Correct. And the Lutheran Church, right? So the Lutherans have a different understanding. They would say that because we're all validly baptized, through our common priesthood, we bring about the Eucharist. And our response would be like, well, that doesn't seem like the case of the Last Supper. And that doesn't seem like how the early church understood it either. Because there was always this laying on of hands in order to actually do these things. And the consecration by one of the apostles or their successors. So once you break that, you've broken that line. Which is why our Protestant brothers and sisters don't have a valid priesthood. Right? And so to that point, I would just encourage your friend, well, whatever reason you feel that you don't agree with the church, I would just reflect on the words of Peter. Where else will we go?
Well, she has since broken away from that church, and she's just going to stay in her house. And I said, well, okay, but just remember, where two or more are gathered in my name.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I mean,
There I am.
I think we also think about these things that we do and the things that we celebrate aren't just eternal things, right? They don't lead to our salvation. They do, but not just that, right? They really establish for us a way of life. And I think it's tragic that someone can think or feel or believe that they can just stop receiving these things and be okay. And maybe they might be, right? But will they be happy? I don't know.
No.
I don't know.
One day at a time.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? We talk about these, and unfortunately, evangelizing. And here's the thing: she's still Catholic.
Yes.
We saw she's Catholic. She's baptized Catholic. She can never get rid of that. It's just unfortunate that she feels that way. And I think when it comes to evangelization, we have to keep that in mind that that's meeting people where they are. And based on the relationship we have, we can help them move in some ways, but that can't be huge streams. I think being present, listening, and I think engaging. Even though as difficult as it may be, hearing them out of what their disagreements are. And having a listening heart and not necessarily jumping to defend.
No.
Right?
No. We have a great relationship.
Good.
And,
Yeah.
she's very happy to discuss. And we, so
Sure.
it's good.
Yeah, no, and I think that's good as long as she's open to discuss. And open to discussion, but also being open to maybe being challenged, and that may take some time too. Because I think a lot of that's building that relationship of listening, and then I think I see this a lot in spiritual direction typically, right? So the key of spiritual direction is not necessarily to fix all the problems right now. It's hearing people out and saying, okay, let's build that establishment of trust. And then once it's established, it's kind of presenting, well, have you ever thought about this? Have you thought about it in this way? Right? Or how's that impacting you? Right? It's kind of inviting to kind of growth.
Well, she knows how happy I am.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and see, I think that's the key. I think when people realize, this person's really happy and I'm not really feeling that, I wonder what the difference is. That does leave open some communication to be like, well, yeah, I'm receiving Jesus every day or every Sunday. How can I not be? Yeah. Right? Yeah. No, good. I think that's a question a lot of us struggle with, because I think we all know people that have gone to either are not going at all to church, especially after COVID, or maybe going to other churches where maybe they feel, emotionally fulfilled, right? And I think that's kind of the thing is that some of the rise of some of these mega churches, they're all filled with ex-Catholics, or not actually ex-Catholics, but non-practicing Catholics, and boy, that's unfortunate, because regardless of, whether it's, well, the sexual abuse crisis, that was the last straw, or all things new is the last straw, or, I don't agree with the church on their stance on abortion or gay marriage or whatever it is. Well, those are sort of, on the face, right? Those are the things that are really kind of just like not insignificant, but also not insurmountable.
They're excuses.
Right. So in other words, I can say the reason I'm not going to mass is because I don't agree with gay marriage. Really? So you're giving up Jesus and the grace he wants to give you because you disagree politically with the stance of the church, which maybe you don't even fully understand. Right? So let's talk about it. Now let's talk about what the church actually teaches compared to what you think the church teaches, and come to an understanding. Because oftentimes it comes to like, well, the church just hates gay people. Really? Okay. Well, I know plenty of gay men and women that are practicing Catholic and living their life in a lot of joy. So it seems like they don't hate them. Now, if you're saying that you have empathy and sympathy for people who experience same-sex attraction and don't think it's fair that they can't enjoy certain rights sacramentally that other people that are not experiencing same-sex attraction can, well, let's talk about that. So you have compassion, which is good, and so do I. But we have to understand what marriage is. And so marriage is an act of love that's based on three ends and goods, right? And so it's not the fact that two men can't love each other in a very deep, intimate way. No one's saying they can't. But to say that that's equivalent to a marriage, well, what do you mean by that, right? Because marriages have certain ends and goals and unities that can only be done through a male and a female body, right? So let's understand that. And let's not, we're all sinners in many ways, right? That doesn't mean people can't slip and fall and sin. And also, that doesn't mean they can't be reconciled and receive forgiveness either. So what are we really talking about here?
Remember when you took Father Spritzer to the airport?
Yeah.
That stuck in my mind. How did you say it again?
So for those of you who don't, I don't know when I I say it? Was this like I don't know.
I don't know if it was
All right.
here or in a sermon or
Okay.
somewhere.
Yeah, for those who don't know the story, so when I was in the seminary, I had every year they had this Kenrick lecture series that happens in October, and I was asked to take Father Robert Spitzer, who is a renowned physicist, astrophysicist. He was the president of Gonzaga University. He's on EWTN, a brilliant man. He's also a very sound theologian. So because he's a Jesuit, I need to point that out. But no, a really good Jesuit, good priest, good man. I had the honor of taking him to the airport. And I guess it was because maybe I have a scientific background. And actually, it was myself and another priest friend of mine who was seminary at the time, Father Chris Smith. So we were both, he was a pharmacist, I was an engineer. And so I thought they would think it would be a good conversation to have together, which it was. And, when we were driving to the airport, I just, turned to Father Spitzer and said, Father, your lecture was awesome. Your book is amazing. I love it. One thing I want to ask you, you have a lot of interaction with scientists and, people in that field. I know a lot of, it was interesting, from my background at Boeing, we had a lot of Catholics that were working in our group. And we also had a few atheists, right? And so I said, you have all these studies, you've done these researches, like, and the stuff you put out there about, like, the probability of life existing, or, the fact that now we have scientific proof that there was a time when time was not. When you present this to scientists, that's kind of irrefutable at this point. How can they still respond with, I don't believe, right? They say, well, you worked with atheists. I'm like, yeah. You worked with people who don't believe, yeah. Well, then you should know better than anyone else that in order to say that, that means they have to change their life. And that was like, yeah. Sure, yes, that makes complete sense. Because, and I experienced this too in my life as an engineer. When I was working, I was making more money than I ever knew to do with. I didn't have a want for anything. I was comfortable. And I came to realize that's not a good position to be in. Because where was their growth? Where was their change? And in the same way, sometimes we make comfort our God. And I think a lot of these people that are called themselves atheists, if that's really true, I don't know. But I think that's it. They make these other things their God. They make being right their God, or they make their own superiority their God, or they make comfortableness their God. And that's why I think we can say there's really no true atheist. You're going to serve something or somebody, right? Whether it's your own ideology, whether it's your own comfortableness, whether it's even, a pagan God that you don't really necessarily know. We all serve a God in some way. The question is, do we serve the true God? And if we're serving the true God, that means every one of us needs to change our life in some way, or at least be moving towards that. Right? And that's hard. And I think most people then in the field of science question about, well, what's easier for me? Because one thing I know as an engineer, and unfortunately I think I still maybe have some of these habits, we're lazy. We are lazy people. We want to do the things the easiest thing to do, right? And just sometimes the easiest thing to do is the right thing, but most times it's not. And so when we talk about things like efficiency, that's what efficiency is, trying to find the best thing to do in the least amount of time, right? And so we tend to engage in that in some way. And that can really spill into our natural lives too, because what's easier for me to do? Is it easier for me to go to the supermarket and buy my own food and cook my own food, or is it easier for me to go to McDonald's and grab a hamburger? Yeah, right. Is it easier for me to go and actually take a walk around the block and maybe get some exercise, or just sit here and watch another YouTube video? Right?
You have to be an engineer to figure that one out.
Amen. But that's the thing, I think we're talking about changing of life. That's what we're called to do, right? And some of us do better than others. But also, again, that's why we have a great sacrament we can actually go to and receive God's grace and mercy to help us do that. Right? Yeah, so that's the Father Spitzer story. So if you haven't read his book, it's called In the Beginning. It's an amazing book. He's written others too, but that's a good one. It really talks about Genesis and how we can understand scientific discovery today within the context of that, which is beautiful.
Is it written on a level that a non-engineer would understand it?
That's hard for me to answer, Kathy, just because
you're an
yeah,
engineer.
right. I mean, I found it an incredibly awesome read.
Okay.
But I'm a nerd too, so I mean I can understand that. So I don't know.
Okay.
Some people, the book that we got for Advent, the Eucharistic People book, which is we're getting ready for the Eucharistic Congress. I thought that was an incredibly good read and kind of easy read for me, but I've had other people said, "Oh, it's really difficult." I'm like, "Oh, sorry." So I may not be the best judge of that, right? But to be fair, we also had other non-engineers in our. So that was one of the books we read in seminary, and the non-engineers enjoyed it too. So,
Okay.
but also too, we also are all studying theology too. So it's consider the source. I guess.
Well, the reason I ask, some people love Aquinas' Summa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and, No,
Yeah.
I know.
I mean, you have to know Aristotle's thinking
Yeah.
to get there.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're reading through, we're working through in Respect Life Apostles, the theology of the body. We're going to just go through every single one of them. So we started back from 1979. We've only read about, I think we've gotten through March of 1980 so far. And so, but to read John Paul II in the same way, like even me, even with my philosophy background, I'll read JP2 and it's like, I don't know what you're trying to say here. It's a lot of philosophical language, and to be able to, you almost have to read it like 3 or 4 times for actually, oh, that's what you meant. So yeah, I get it. Yeah. So I would say that's not on the par with like JP2 or the Summa.
Okay.
But it wouldn't necessarily be like a nursery rhyme book either. So
Okay.
yeah, I don't know. Yeah, somewhere between there, I guess. All right.
No Matthew Kelly.
What's that?
It's no Matthew Kelly.
No Matthew. Yeah, no, I would say it's a little bit more advanced than Matthew Kelly.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. And nothing against Matthew Kelly. We got some good stuff out there.
He does,
Yeah,
yeah.
right. So yeah, for sure. Yeah.
He reached a lot of people
He
right
does.
where they were.
He does. That's great. Yeah. Good. Well, good. Any other questions, comments, concerns here? This side's kind of quiet over here. All right.
We're just listening.
All right. All right. Well, that's it.
Almost an hour.
All right. Well, thanks for coming, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
We'll see everyone
thank
next
you.
week. Oh, by the way, we did kind of were discussing possibly a topic for Friends Who Faith. It was brought up, maybe could bring up a history of the parish, and I was thinking about that. But also, thanks to Renee, we also have a very good kind of history of the parish up on the webpage. And I don't know if, first off, I could fill the time, but also I don't know if I could really expand on what's already there. So I might go a different route for our Friends from Faith, which would be not next Tuesday, but the Tuesday after. What I'm thinking about is maybe talking about the whys behind Mary's Assumption.
Mary's Assumption.
Being
Okay.
being that August, there's a lot of Marian. We got the Assumption. We got also actually it's actually in line with Transfiguration too, as well as the Queenship of Mary. It might be fitting to talk about that topic. So that's what I'm kind of leaning towards. And again, I really more focus on the Friends from Faith, the whys of the faith rather than the whats. So that might be a good discussion as far as the Assumption of Mary, why that would be necessary, and why that would be appropriate.
I like it.
Great. All right.
That's good.
Great.
you.
We'll see everyone
Thank
next
you,
week then.
Father.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.